Hello, nice to be here with you. And to follow the Who is always a challenging thing to do. Never go on after the Who, I think somebody said. But hey, so I'm Stephen Budd. I'm a long-term music manager, music executive based in London. I've been working in music. This is my 50th year of being paid to work in music, starting as a roadie aged, oh gosh, 15, 16 years old. Motorhead was my first employer at their very first gig. And then moving forward from there, I've done quite a lot of things across the music business over those decades, from running small independent labels, managing artists, running music festivals that I've started. Of course, I'm a long-term manager of record producers and songwriters, which is a thread that's gone through most of my career. And managing artists. I've managed a whole variety of artists from the 80s onwards, bands like Gang of Four, The Magic Numbers, Heaven 17, Songhoi Blues. I'm currently managing a band called Nubian Twist, who are part of that great whole young British jazz phenomena that's arisen over the last 10 years. And I've worked for 15 years with Damon Albarn on his, well, more than 15 years, on his Africa Express project, which is a musical collaborations project putting together African artists and Western artists. And yeah, so I've touched on quite a lot of different strands over these decades.
Well, you must be about 104. You have 24 hours in your day or what? I mean, oh my God. It's incredible because like obviously I've done a bit of my homework and stuff. And it's incredible the kind of, the wide cross section of producers, for instance, that you've got. But before we get into that, one of the most recent things I read about, that obviously you know about because you did it, is this Marianne Faithfull Broken English film that's about to be
Yes.
released. So good timing. Fire away, sir.
Well, it's an incredible film. It's coming out in cinemas here in the UK, I think from the March the 20th. It's been at all the film festivals. It's a very, very, very special film. It's an interview set up in an extremely interesting way with Marianne. It was filmed very shortly before she passed. You can tell her health is poor, but her spirits are really quite amazing. It's I won't give the game away because it's done in such a unique way, but it is beautifully shot, very clever interviews in a way that you will find extremely surprising when you see the film. What I can tell you is the film is interspersed with live music recordings of various artists singing some of Marianne's songs. That includes Nick Cave, Courtney Love, Jenny Beth, the guys from Sonic Youth, Beth Orton, and this has all been coordinated and recorded and produced by Rob Ellis, who is somebody that I manage. And Rob was the producer of PJ Harvey, amongst others, and of course produced the last couple of Marianne albums and had a very close personal relationship with Marianne, stretching back. So he was rather honoured to be asked to do the soundtrack for the movie, which in two forms. Recording the artists, as we've just discussed, and in a studio setting where you'll be able to see those performances live in the film, and indeed the very last filmed studio session of Marianne, um, which is an extremely touching moment in the film. Again, I won't give it away, but it is beautiful. And then also the incidental music, the actual soundtrack music and theme that he's composed with Adrian Utley from Portishead. So the two of them working on that film. He's also the MD, the musical director of the live performance, which will be happening at the Barbican in London next week, where several of those artists, aforementioned artists, are coming together to perform Marianne's songs with a screening of the film at the Barbican in the big main room there. So we've been putting that project together over the last few weeks. Rob's been rehearsing it all, and my role in this was really just bringing the film company and Rob together, and negotiating the deal and being in the background, kind of like exec producing the soundtrack aspect of the album.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to see it. I must throw this story in because it's something I've never shared.
Please.
I worked
You
that
had a
album.
connection, right?
Sorry? Yeah, well,
You
I
have a
worked the
connection.
Broken English album. I was at Ireland in 1979 doing regional promotion. I did 2 or maybe 3 days on the road with her. And she was a dream. I mean, considering she's met, considerably more famous people than me, she was just so great because going from radio to radio interview, an hour's drive, there's a lot of kind of time to pass. Anyway, we get back to the hotel where she's staying, and she said, what's happening then? What are we doing? And jokingly, I said, well, Manchester United are playing Benfica tonight, And she said, oh, right. So, I mean, it was a joke. So then she proceeds to take her clothes off. We're in a bedroom. Take her clothes off. Not all of them, but enough for me to say glued to the TV. you know. And she got in with a book. You had to be there. And I was sat on the top of the bed on the other side watching the game.
Do you know what? If that was in 1979, I don't think I would have been able to concentrate on the football.
Well, exactly. That's when she
To be honest,
started.
I would not have been able to, and God knows would I've been able to be appropriate in the circumstances. I would have probably been sacked the next day, but there we are.
Well, we all
No,
grew up on Marianne Faithfull and people like that,
oh my
let's be
goodness,
honest.
oh my goodness,
She's a legend in her own
what,
right. I mean,
what an
it's so
incredible woman.
sad. So
Yeah.
sad. Anyway,
I think as a teenager, Girl on a Motorcycle was probably one of my favorite movies.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you've got a lot to look back on. I mean, I find it incredible. I'm not here to patronize you, but I really have no clue how you manage the amount of stuff that you do. I mean, your artist roster goes from producers to artists to songwriters, but they're all genres of music. It's not like, well, I'll concentrate on rock or I'll do folk rock or something like that. You've got hip hop and people like that. How do you manage it all? Because your ability to deal with different personalities and characters, and there are assholes in the business and stuff, but you're kind of an
Really?
A&R person by doing all that because you've got to pick
Yeah.
the right people. Because I always say, you never find a great artist without a great manager, and I've had the privilege of working with the Paul McGuinnesses and the Michael Littmans and learning subliminally as you go along as to why
Yeah.
those bands are successful and what they do and stuff and things. So your cross section of artists, and the thing that stood out, dare I say, above all, was Tony Visconti.
Right.
So can you just
Well, I
tell me
was
a little bit about, I mean, talk about legends.
sure. I mean, I was very lucky, aged 20, oh gosh, 23, I think, um, to start working with Tony. In fact, he was the first producer I was ever really directly involved with, and then was honored to represent him and work with him for a number of years at his fantastic studio, which still exists. It's Good Earth Studios, which is in Soho in London, which is now called Dean Street Studios, but it's pretty much the same studio. I often pop in there. It's directly opposite the Groucho Club, if you know where that is, in Soho, on the
Yep.
other corner across Old Compton Street, and opposite the French House pub. So name dropping a few very socially important places. Um, yeah, I was managing a band that I'd signed to MCA Records, and called the Big Sound Authority, and I think I was 23, and MCA, which is of course is now Universal, but at that point it was a it was a major company, but it was a small major company. This is when there were like five majors, you know better than anybody. And it was being run by an American guy, and they had signed Nick Kershaw, Musical Youth, Tom Petty, and my little band called the Big Sound Authority, who
All
I
right.
had put on tour with the wonderful Style Council. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I managed to get Robin Miller to produce a single with them. Robin, of course, the producer of Sade. And they were a kind of soul-y kind of band. In fact, they were like an eight-piece band, with three brass players. It was, full-on live show. And Robin couldn't make the album because he was drafted in to do the second Sade album. And I was left, there was no A&R person at MCA, and I was left and told by the managing director of the company, you know, we'll give you the budget, you A&R it, you find a producer. And I was like, all right, well, I don't really know much about producers. Who's my favourite artist? David Bowie. Who produces David Bowie? Well, there's two or three people, but this guy, Tony Visconti. Okay, Tony Visconti. Where's Tony Visconti? Ah, he's got a studio in Dean Street, and we were in Brewer Street, which was round the corner, MCA Records. And I thought, well, I'll give it a chance. And I walked around with a cassette, knocked on the door, was led in to the reception, and I said, "Would you mind giving this cassette to Tony Visconti? I'd like to see if he'd want to produce this band." And about an hour and a half later, I'm in my tiny little office up in Queen's Park, and I get a call. Tony would like to come up and meet you. I was, okay, great. He'll see you in half an hour. I was like, okay. And this guy on a motorbike turned up, took his helmet off. Tony Visconti walked into my office, sat down, and he went, "Tell me about your band." And I was like,
Love it.
enthusiastic. Anyway, the next thing I knew, we were making an album with Tony Visconti at Good Earth. I was sat there in and out all the time. We developed a relationship. He asked me if I'd be interested in coming to work in the studio and managing him. To be honest, I wasn't making much money managing the band, even though we'd had a top 20. And during that period of making that album, we formed a proper, meaningful relationship. And I was tasked with keeping the studio occupied because it was a very expensive studio, the first SSL studio in the world,
Wow.
and also had the most high-end spec gear. Tony was a total gear freak. He would buy any bit of gear that would float by and try it out, but he'd pay full price for it. And I was tasked with trying to keep this studio, afloat and occupied at least 30 days a month, which is what it needed to be because we had very expensive rent to pay. And I figured, well, if I manage producers, I could force them to work in the studio. Of course, it doesn't work like that, right? But I didn't know that.
Sorry, was he
So
one
I
of your
thought
early? Was he one of your proteges? One of your earlier producers you managed?
Tony was the very first producer I took on.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
Not bad
So
stuff.
he was. I was in literally baptism of fire. I was kind of involved in running the studio, and he said, "Well, I need to, you know, I need to be in the studio. I don't need to be, like fielding work inquiries or looking for work. You do that." Right. So there was no such thing as managing producers
Yeah.
really at that point. There was one or two people who would keep diaries, but there was nobody actually going out and visiting record companies and talking to the A&R people. What acts have you got? Or fielding those inquiries. Normally, a producer would deal directly with the label, right? Suddenly, I found myself in between the producer and the label, trying to work out, is this the right act for Tony to work with? Why is it the right act? Who's the management? What is the budget that they've got behind them? Where's this act going to go? And work out all of that stuff. And then, if we decided we were going to work with them, put together a budget timeline and go through the entire process of working on a record together, right? So I learned that at the feet of Tony. Really, my little office was behind the control room. I had a window which had a one-way mirror in it,
What year
looking
was
into the
this?
control room. 84.
Wow.
And I had a one-way mirror looking into the studio, so I could see Tony working, and then Tony would come into my little office and sit down and say, "Oh, the singer's a effing arsehole. We've got to figure out a way to get him to fucking sing without giving him drugs, right?" And etc. 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 And I learned just an enormous amount about the way that Tony worked on records, and it was a phenomenal experience, and lots of wonderful, crazy stories about what happened at the studio during that period. But for 3 or 4 years, I worked in that way with Tony, and then, but I figured out, as I said, I needed to take on other clients and start to find, projects that I could bring into the studio to keep the studio busy. Primarily, that was the reason, right?
Yeah.
And I'd heard this record, Africa Bambata, um, and it was kind of like this mind-blowing record, and it was really the kind of birth of hip hop. And I was like, who produced this?
Oh, the
And
Vega.
it was this
Mm.
guy called Arthur Baker, and who I hadn't heard of. And where is Arthur Baker? He's in New York. Okay, well, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to go and find Arthur Baker. So I got on a plane turned up at Arthur's studio. He had a studio, I think it was called Criminal Records, I think it was called, and knocked on the door. And a rather bemused Arthur Baker was like, "You've come all the way from London to meet me?" He said, "Look, come to this club tonight. I'm DJing, and we'll talk after that." So I went down to this club, um, really famous club that I've forgotten the fucking name of now. But anyway, really famous club in New York in the mid 80s, like
Studio
super famous.
54.
No, I wish.
Yeah. I
That had
just
got.
sorry to interrupt there, Stephen, but it was a kind of similar thing, but it did involve Studio 54 because Rob Gretton, who managed New Order, of course, Arthur
Yeah,
Baker with New Order,
of
and
course.
it was the same thing. And I managed Peter Hook for a while. I wasn't a great manager, but Peter is still a good friend and stuff after he left New
Lovely
Order.
man.
But
Loved
the
Peter.
different kind of sounds that he did, and just to go back to your days of managing producers and stuff, if I'm not mistaken, I think Michael Littman was the first person to do it because he thought he managed obviously George Michael and Bernie Taupin, so he'd managed different and then Matchbox 20 when I was working with him. But he always thought that producers deserved as much attention as the artists.
Yeah,
Because it's
absolutely. I mean,
artist development but it's from a different side, isn't it?
completely. I mean, it's a different skill set. The artist wakes up in the morning and they are the project.
Yeah,
They're their own project. The producer wakes up in the morning, he goes, "Which project am I working on today?" Right? So there is that separation. There's generally egos are slightly more manageable, you know, and there's a lot of fun involved in it too. I mean, it's like the skill that I developed and continue to use to this day is really just trying to work out what an artist needs from a producer. And there's so many different styles of producer. There's so many different, there's people who are more involved in musical arrangement, or obviously songwriter producers, or they're coming from a strictly studio background and they're an engineer based originally, or they're just somebody who's some kind of musical savant like Rick Rubin, who doesn't have a particular set of skills, but he knows how to make a good record just by listening and guiding people
yeah,
gently. So there really is an extraordinary, and then within each musical genre, there are versions of those people within each musical genre. So you've got to kind of figure out what the artist really needs, match that up to the kind of expectations that they might have, the budgets that they've got, the timeline that they've got, the kind of record that they want to make, and then try and bring all of that together in one package. And that's what a producer manager does, and negotiates the deal and makes sure all the contracts are sorted and chase the royalties, make sure all the registrations are done, all of that kind of technical stuff in the background as well. But it's got an A&R function to it, and it's got a technical function to it. So it's got both of those, and you're liaising both with the label A&R people, the label coordinators, all right, the people who actually do all the bookings, and the artist manager. Or more often nowadays, it's primarily the artist manager, because artist managers are effectively being all of those things because so many artists are self-releasing these days. All right.
yeah.
So you really have to like figure out those kind of relationships and know the strengths and weaknesses of your particular clients, what they're really best tasked with, and try and channel the projects to the right people in the right way.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm just going to kind of digress a little bit away from producers at the moment because I did
Yeah.
listen to that thing this morning and I was kind of, it was captivating. It was fantastic. The guy's a really good interviewer and he has a lot of good people on as well. But I heard you mention In the City and Tony Wilson
Yes.
from back in the day. I'm sure that's where we must have met because I was
I
on a
think
lot of
so.
the panels, but I went to the first one.
Yeah.
And the first one, because it was like, because it wasn't London, people thought, well, Manchester, I mean, I'm from Manchester. So, Manchester's always been
I
a
can
music
tell.
city. I've had Harvey Goldberg on here, Harvey Lesberg, who managed
Mm,
Herman's Hermits, for God's sake, who were huge in the
mm.
States and stuff from the 60s. And he's got a lot of information and stuff. But going back to In the City, I mean, I thought it was a great idea. But the first one, people were kind of cynical about it. The second one, people like Maurice Oberstein came. Um, Peter Grant was there. That was one of my starstruck moments because I got
Well, I
into
was there.
I got into
Yeah.
the elevator going up to sign in, and I was stood next to Peter Grant, and the likes of ourselves, it's not hard to start a conversation, but it's like I don't because I grew up on Led Zeppelin. They were kind of like, my heroes. That was kind of, the type of stuff I grew up in. But I remembered like Ed Bicknell was there, and in the big room, he interviewed Peter Grant. I don't know if you're there. I was on the second row,
Well,
and
I was. Let me tell you something about that, because the reason why Peter was there, and the reason why Ed, who's a good friend, was there, good friend of mine, was because had Andy Dodd and Elliot Rashman, who
Elliot, yeah,
managed
Simply Red.
Simply Red, had conceived of an idea of forming a managers union,
Yeah,
right? And a whole bunch of managers, myself included, got together at that In the City conference and sat in a room with Elliot, Ed, and various others, and we decided to form an organisation. And we did indeed form something called the Music Managers Forum, the MMF,
yeah.
right? Which is now in the UK 1,500 strong, an organisation representing managers, but also representing the wider interests of artists to government and all sorts of important organisations and dealing with kind of like key issues in the music industry. And we formed that there and then. And Peter Grant, I remember meeting Peter and having a cup of tea with him. He was absolutely delightful, not scary at all. He was just, at that moment, he was sweet. He was a sweet little old man,
Yeah,
basically. Well, I say little, he definitely wasn't little, but sweet.
yeah.
But he was kind of quite calm and was quite happy to chat. Was like, and I sat down and had a cup of tea with him, in a teapot, and that was a really fantastic moment. But that organisation, which I then later became the chairman of, the Music Managers Forum. I was chairman between 2014 to 2019, I think, 2018, has become this extraordinary organisation now, 1,500 members in the UK, 24 chapters around the world,
Wow.
including the USA, thousands and thousands of managers around the world, and that was birthed out of that moment in the city in 1994, right?
That's
So
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, that was a great conference. Tony Wilson, as you said, who of course ran Factory Records, was a personality in his own right, ex-TV personality, and had run,
Tony
current
was,
affair programs.
yeah, Tony was incredible. I mean, I worked for Factory for 10 years, so I worked
Yeah,
all that stuff through the time and, within the city and stuff and things like that. But I kind of got Tony into, I don't really remember, there was a World in Action program many, many years ago
yeah,
about chart hyping and stuff, which obviously with payola was big in the States, but nothing here,
yeah,
So I was working Ireland at the time, and I think it was Blue Monday, and we were playing cricket. There was a Granada TV celebrity cricket match, and I wasn't a celebrity or working for Granada, but I was the only one who played cricket. So I was captain of the team, So we're sitting there in the Cheshire countryside, and it's the tea interval, and everybody's kind of gently sitting there and, sipping cups of tea. And Tony's rolling a joint, tree interval. I'm sitting chit-chatting with him. And I asked him about the record. I said, what are you doing with it? And he said, well, I don't know about. And he was intimating the fact that he didn't believe in hyping. I looked at him, I said, give me some records, And he said, well, I said, do you put your records in the shops? He said, yeah. I said, do you put a gun to people's heads and force them to buy them? He said, no. I said, give me a box of fucking records. My gas is paid, my petrol's paid for, my expenses are driving around the country. I'll drop them off on people's desk. They're not going to go out and buy it, but they would play it. And I got him into regional promotion, understanding what it was about. And he was very, very receptive. I remember taking Bono in there in the early days. He wasn't a fan, but he was very intent and listened to him. Bono, I mean, they grew up on Joy Division. They were huge fans. So to meet Tony Wilson was like a star moment for them. But it's incredible when you make those connections. I mean, obviously, the people that you've met and worked with along the way. I mean, from what I've seen, just in the few emails we've had and listening to the stuff and the old things that you do and things, you have an incredible ability to connect people. And my favorite subject in all my career was artist development. I mean, I worked David Bowie, but it would have been fine without me. Same with Whitney Houston, the Police, But it's nice to have them on your roster. But having got you two their first TV and their first national radio performance, and growing up and learning my trade as they were learning theirs, those are the things that come back and you think, wow, that was quite a moment. I mean, I don't sit here and be like gazing out the window, but I think when you do get older, the gratitude sets in. And, you enter the music industry, and I was turning 50, and the music industry was falling apart around me, and I hadn't done anything wrong. But I had a contract with BMG, and they brought it all in house, and it was never going to be like it was. So I kind of did my Ziggy Stardust and reinvented myself. And subliminally, those things affect you. But when you're a, dare I use the word grown up, it kind of changes the way you think about things. And I look back on the times that were, I mean, I'd love to talk to you about the future of the industry and stuff like from what I heard, but we won't have the time today. Anyway, I'm going to show up what we're talking about.
That's all right. I mean, it's funny you were talking about that. I remember being at the first or the second U2 gig in London, which was at the Moonlight Club in West Hampstead, and I went out to dinner afterwards with Tony McGuinness and
Paul McGuinness, yeah.
and the, Tony
Yeah.
McGuinness, Paul McGuinness, and the Edge, and we went to the Portobello Hotel, right, and had dinner there, and. It was an extraordinary because the Moonlight Club held, 200 people, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
but they had built on the stage. They built U2 in drain pipes, right? U2 in
Yeah.
drain pipes, big, like 15 foot high, okay, in this tiny little club, and Bono was climbing all over this kind of
Yeah.
framing,
Uh,
thinking that he was in Wembley, right, in front of 200 people,
yeah.
and it was like a Wembley Stadium show, but in front of 200 people. I was like, this band, you could just tell this enormous ambition that they had, and I was still very young. The Moonlight Club was an amazing thing. I saw Joy Division in there
Yeah.
as well, and I had a band called The Sound, who were signed by Rob Dickens at
Oh, right.
Corova Records. And their other band was Echo and the Bunnymen, and the Sound went on to become quite a sort of, they were a stalwart at the Moonlight Club. They went on to become quite a sort of cult band. Incredibly, 40 something years later, there are six tribute acts just for the Sound. You think there would be just six tribute acts for U2, but there are six
Really?
tribute acts
Oh,
for
my
the
God.
Sound. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go and check them out if
Yeah.
you haven't heard them since
It was
1979 or
I was
1980.
actually at Charisma when I first saw you too, because we all got laid off, five of us. Ireland had financial problems, so the five regional promotion guys got laid off. I got a job 20 minutes later with Charisma working Peter Gabriel and Genesis, which apart from Bob Marley, were the biggest bands I'd worked. And Mark Radcliffe was living with me. And my friend Neil, the press officer at Ireland, said you got to go see this band. And put it this way, it was easier to go than not go because he would have bent your ear, all over for not going. So we went, and they were third on the bill. Warheat, Pink Military, and you
Yeah.
too. And in those days it was like at Manchester Polytechnic. You can hear the till and people talking at the bar, and there's like 25 people at the stage. And it's funny you
Fantastic.
talk about Bono and the balconies and all that and everything. And they weren't very good, which is great because you shouldn't be. It's like Dave Grohl says in the early days of Nirvana. He said we were so shit. That's what bands should be. And he was swinging from the central heating pipes, and his hands were bright red. But after the gig, Stephen, they came out and met everybody, want to meet them, sign them, and then they
Mm.
got in a van with the tour manager driving and the equipment in back, 4 hours in the pouring rain to stay in one motel, maybe two motel rooms. It's called paying your dues, isn't it? But the thing is, could you imagine nowadays Bono getting on social media in a car on a 4 hour drive and waking up and having 400 fans in Japan and South Africa and everywhere? They never had that. It was blood, sweat, and tears.
Absolutely. And
Sorry, I went off on that.
driving around in a transit, I saw a very good quality transit van parked up last week. I posted about it, funny enough. Um, and it took me right back. It's like the transit van was the weapon of choice for roadies
Yeah,
schlepping up and down the M1 from Manchester to London to Glasgow to Brighton to Bristol, wherever. And the amount of time I spent in a transit van, lifting gear in and out of that van and sleeping on top of the gear, under a blanket in the
yeah,
fucking freezing winter, waiting for the next venue to open up so that we can set up the next gig. Um, yeah, happy days,
I,
kind of. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, people don't realise, there was that enormous, infrastructure that existed in those days where it was possible for bands to go out and play 3, 4, 5 nights a week, and still make just enough money to pay for the petrol and have a place to stay and have enough grub. And that's the way you did pay your dues. You would do 2, 3, 400 shows before getting signed.
And I think the
And
thing is with them, I mean, if you look back to those days, I mean, you two, like, had 50, they were signed for 50 grand. Nobody wanted to sign them. They was on the ladies' toilet from the
I
captain,
don't think it was as much as 50 grand. It might have been, but
Well, and they had 50 grand
might have
tour
been 10.
support. Well, 50 grand
Yeah.
advance and 50 grand tour support. And the
Oh, that's
thing
pretty good.
is, if you two came out today, they'd be dropped within 6 months. It took me a year
Oh,
to
yeah.
get them on the radio. But the thing
Sure.
is, they were into Ireland for like, $250,000 in tour support because they toured their asses off in the States and the
Yeah.
UK and everywhere. And Ireland, like, they weren't the richest company, but it was like pay us when you've got it. And there came a time down the line where
Yeah.
Ireland owed you to 1 million in royalties. And they said, pay us when you've got it, McGuinness. And I love
Yeah.
that kind of, family working together. For me, they're a classic case study, from coming from nowhere. But you talk about all these trendy words now that apply to music as well as corporate America and wherever, persistence and resilience. They bled it all the time, they would never give up. And even those days, Bono would climb into the circle when they started doing the concert gigs. And there were no kind of radio mics then. The tour manager was running behind with the lead, thinking, oh my God, is he going to fall tonight? Anyway, we've not got too much time still left. So where do you want to go to from what I've been rambling on? I kind of got interrupted a bit there.
Well, I mean, we've got into the history of it. I mean, I kind of, it's really up to you what you want to talk about. I mean, I got into live music. I became a director of a company called Channel Fly when I merged my business with them in early 2000. They owned the Barfly Club in Camden, and then all of a sudden I found myself involved in the live music side and developing and opening up clubs around the UK. We ended up with 9 Barflies. We bought the Borderline, the
Wow,
Garage,
yeah.
eventually the Jazz Cafe, the Forum in Kentish Town, and then eventually the company bought Hammersmith Apollo, and all of a sudden it was quite an enormous, well, enormous is the wrong word, mid-size venue owning business that faced a hostile takeover. I had started a company called Supervision Management, which went on to represent Franz Ferdinand and the Kaiser Chiefs and various other
Oh,
bands,
wow.
run by my partner at the time, Paul Craig, who now manages Biffy Clyro. Um, and Paul hired Stern Canning and James Sandham. James now runs Red Light. Cern is still managing Franz Ferdinand. Um, and I merged that business with Channel Fly, and we grew that into quite a substantial business, as I mentioned. And then I got into starting festivals. So I came up with a crazy idea of doing a festival in India called the NH7 Weekender. Mad scenario, long story, which involves all sorts of people, including prime ministers and people who run Glastonbury Festival. All sorts of people were wrapped up into this. But that festival carries on today. It is now 15 years in. It's the biggest independent music festival in India. Started off just as a mad idea in 2010 when I took over Asian Dub Foundation for their first ever gig in India. The Magic Numbers, who I was managing at the time, Reverend and the Makers, and various other people, and we put on a tiny little 5,000 people, not tiny, but 5,000 people show in Pune, which is near Mumbai, and that was really the first independent rock festival in India, and it grew to what it is today. It now is 40,000 people
That's
twice a
fantastic.
year
That's
in India, and then went on from there to work with Damon Albarn on his Africa Express project, which was another drunken idea that we had in the Groucho Club one night about how to get people to listen to African music seriously. And
Yeah.
we figured that if we got African musicians and Western musicians to work together, and collaborate together, the fans of the Western musicians would be exposed to African music, you know,
Yeah.
and we worked on that project, and it's still going on today. Ian Birrell, who was the editor of the Independent, deputy editor of the Independent newspaper at the time, myself, Damon, and several others ran this wonderful, wonderful project where we were taking Western artists out to Nigeria, the Congo, Ethiopia, Mali, people like Brian Eno, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Franz Ferdinand,
Wow.
Kano, all sorts of incredible people to make records, collaborate on live music, put on shows. As part of the Olympics, we took a train around the UK. We got the Olympics paid for this. We had 50 musicians on the train, two rehearsal carriages. We had John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, the Libertines, Amadou and Mariam, Bubble Mall, the
Wow, that's great.
Noisettes, and Paul McCartney.
Never heard.
And we put on shows each night in we set up tents, circus tents, rehearsed on the train, got off the train, went and performed in the circus tent, got back on the train, rehearsed another show, got out and did the same thing the next night. And we did 7 shows in 7 days. That was a kind of life-changing moment, I think.
Oh, well, I was going to ask you what were moments that what was your the moment that rocked, but we don't need to go there now because I don't want this to run out in 2.5 minutes without saying bye bye. This has been a real pleasure, a total privilege. I could go on forever. The stories are great. Your career's incredible. And I just want you, thank you. I know you're a busy guy and you do a lot of these things. I just want to thank you so much for giving us time to come on my podcast, which is totally
Delighted.
self-indulgence because the premise being if I enjoy the stories, why wouldn't other people?
Right.
Yeah. So there you go.
Listen,
We live in a,
rock and roll stories are the most interesting ones, certainly for me. But delighted to do it, Tony, and thank you for inviting me.
no, thank you, sir. Take care and keep
Take
going.
care.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye now.
Cheers.